In the schools, in the places where the kids hang out, pamphlets. Somehow they're going to, something that they would pick up and read. There was a situation in Peninsula High School where they recorded two girls that were kissing on school grounds, and they actually took that video to the parents of one of the girls, and they immediately moved the other girl out of the school, and there was a big row, and the kids all got upset over it and said, if that was a guy, nobody would have said anything about it. And I just think that those two people's rights were violated, and it just shows you how archaic the schools can get. I mean, by actually running that girl out of that school like that. And I just see it all the time, and I'm thoroughly disgusted.
Well, how really, you know, how archaic is sex education in schools today? I don't think personally that it's going far enough. I mean, it's not that you've got to get down to the absolute graphic of details.
But you have to get by bureaucracy.
You do, but I think that just as important, personally speaking, just as important as it is for kids to know about sex and about safe sex, they also need to be made aware of circumstances that can arise, and in this day and age do arise, not just from the lack of safe sex, but from drug abuse. We find that often, you know, in the news, people, you know, going off with illegal drugs and things, and just outright abusing themselves over and beyond what the classroom is teaching today. Any idea?
Well, in our local schools, the sex education, per se, is begun in the 3rd grade. But what they teach them then is to be aware of their bodies and differences in girls and boys, and that's a basic thing they do with them. And that my great-grandkids, that's as far as they've gone so far, so I don't know what they do in the other grades.
Interestingly, when I was in school, in grade school and junior high in Houston, Texas, the school system there was fairly progressive by comparison to today. And in the 7th grade, I clearly remember our coach, the PE coach, who was also my football coach, sitting each class down, and he'd turn a little red-faced sometimes because he was embarrassed talking about it, but he described everything, and it was very informative. And this was in the 60s. But they don't do it today, from what I hear.
That was just classes of boys. They didn't do that with the girls.
I assume that the girls' PE teachers did it, but I don't know.
Just a second.
I don't know.
Hold that thought.
Okay.
You see how this is really bounce off of each other? Now, if it was good enough for the boys to learn this stuff, why isn't it good enough for the girls? Because
the female teachers, PE teachers, were too embarrassed to talk to the girls about it. Now the male teachers talked to the boys, but the females would not talk to the girls.
Have you had people come into your office like that? I mean, some young girls say, "I'm really, you know, stupid. You know, I don't have all the facts down. My boyfriend does, but I don't."
Well, I can tell you that there are some what I would call polarization. Men in general in our society have a little more power than women.
Yeah.
And they're believed to be sort of on the sexual prowl most of the time. Women are seen as sort of objects of sexuality, and would prefer not to have sex themselves, but they, you know, sort of need to have sex because their husbands want them to have sex.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this perception out there that's very, very common, that women, you know, are just sort of passive bystanders in the sexual game, and they're not really interested in having sex themselves. I think that's probably altogether wrong. Women are probably every bit as much interested in sex as men are, but we haven't wanted to face that in society very, very easily.
What do you think about it?
Well, yeah, I would agree with Dr. Wood here that I certainly am acquainted with some women who would beg to differ. I don't know. A point just occurred to me, and I guess I'm kind of shifting gears here, but you know, as far as stigma goes, one thing that I certainly noticed, being a HIV positive member of the LGBT community in Seattle, is that the stigma is not just between the non-AIDS, non-gay community and the AIDS community. The stigma is actually within the gay community as well, and which is, it seems to me to be a huge problem in terms of disclosure. You know, for one, it's like there's so much stigma from within the gay community, that how do you face up to that and be honest and disclose your status when you're talking about, making social connections.
It brings up a very valid point that I absolutely wanted to include in on this program. But when someone, Dennis, I'll talk to you, dear friend, but when someone becomes HIV positive, how important is it for them to tell their family? I know it's a very difficult decision to make, but why is it so important?
Well, in my case, I did not hesitate to tell my family, because I had learned about the effects of negative stress on the immune system, and that hiding things and telling stories to cover things up, and then having to tell another story to cover that up, creates a great deal of negative stress. And so my partner, Shane, who is no longer with us, unfortunately, he passed away almost 13 years ago now, but he and I both, as soon as we found out, within a few months of when we got our positive test results, which was in 1985 when they first came out, we both told our families. And I believe that part of the reason that we experienced more longevity with living with the virus than those around us did was because we didn't have that part of the negative stress that goes along with that. We also had the support of our families. Now, certain members of your family may totally reject you. That's something you have to be willing to accept. But in most people's cases, that's not the case with the whole family. And so you try to, just like within your community, there are going to be some people that are going to reject you because you're gay, if you come out, and others that are going to accept you. And so you latch onto those positive points that you can and try to build on them and create a network of support for yourself. And in my case, I'm very fortunate. My dear mother and my dad, God rest his soul, and my aunts and grandparents, my brother.
And your stepdad.
My stepdad, yes. They've all been very, very, very supportive. Now, there are some other members of my family that are more distant, that didn't react and respond quite the same way. But that's okay, because we were able to build on the points that the good points, and ended up having a pretty good, strong network of support within my family. And I would recommend anybody to try to take that tact if they can.
Well, even from a doctor's standpoint, Dr. Wood, how difficult is it for a doctor to tell a patient that they're positive?
Well, it's like telling somebody they have cancer. It's bad news. I see a lot of new people who are diagnosed with HIV. Every Monday morning I'm in clinic seeing the newly identified cases, and I can tell you that virtually everyone is emotionally distraught with that news. One of the reasons I see them actually is because I've had the infection since '83, and I can say, you can live a long time with this infection if you take good care of yourself and have good thoughts. But getting back to one of your earlier questions, Bob, about what does it take to have good care, and we were talking about stigma, I do think that in the early days of this epidemic, a lot of people heard AIDS, later they